Good afternoon, everyone. This will be the final lecture for our class. This will be on John Stuart Mill's Utilitarianism, Chapter 4. It's a short chapter, um, and the point of today's reading is that Mill has to now show that happiness is, in fact, the only thing that human beings desire, that if his utilitarian standard of morality is the standard of morality, if it is the normative standard, that we ought to promote or we ought to choose those things that promote the greatest good. And those things which promote the greatest good are those which produce happiness, and that which produces happiness is what produces pleasure. That's kind of a broken down there, but if that is true, then Mill has to be able to show that there are no other things that human beings desire. Because if there are other things that we desire other than the promotion of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, if everything we choose and all the actions we perform, if they all don't boil down to that, then it leaves open the possibility that there are other reasons that people choose to perform certain actions. And so Mill has to be able, if Mill is going to say that the utilitarian standard is the normative standard of ethics, and that it is the test, not just a test among others, but the test by which we evaluate human action and human choice, then he must show that the only thing we desire is the avoidance of pain and the promotion of pleasure or the seeking of pleasure. He has to show that that's the case. And so today's chapter is really short, but yet today's chapter is really important because if he can't show that, then his utilitarian standard isn't really much of a standard. And remember, this goes all the way back to the fact that Mill is actually deriving his normative standard from the simple empirical psychological observation of human nature, which is that um, the one thing that is fundamentally true about human beings that cannot be disputed no matter who you are is that we like pleasure and we dislike pain. That simple fact allows him to go from that fact to the utilitarian standard. That given this psychological claim about who we are, it follows that the best actions that we should choose are the ones that promote the most pleasure for as many people as possible. So you go from the singular fact of human nature to the normative standard. And so what Mill's up to in today's reading is simply he needs to show that happiness is the only thing that human beings desire. And he doesn't, you may or may not find it convincing, and I'd be curious to see whether you do, but Mill, uh, because one particular, um, one of the imagined objections that he is considering in today's reading is from those who talk about acting virtuously. And this would go back to Aristotle, that in fact virtue is the only thing we desire for its own sake. To being virtuous is the only thing we desire for its own sake. Not because it makes us happy, but that virtue in itself is desirable, not as a means to some further end, but as the end, being virtuous. And Mill is going to have a response that, in essence, he's going to say that being virtuous is not a means to the end of happiness, but that being virtuous is a part of happiness. And I'll say more about that in a second. But um, you know, first, it's important to point out the analogy that that Mill makes on page. Um, so I have the text here I'm looking at page 37. So at the top of 37, Mill says, virtue, according to the utilitarian doctrine, is not naturally and originally part of the end, but it is capable of becoming so. And in those who live it disinterestedly, it has become so, and is desired and cherished not as a means of happiness, but as part of it. So there's the claim, is that virtue is not desired as a means to happiness, but as constitutive of happiness. And so he goes on to make an analogy here with money. He says, there is nothing originally more desirable about money than any heap of glittering pebbles. Its worth is solely that of the things which it will buy. The desires for other things than itself, which it is a means of gratifying. Yet the love of money is not only one of the strongest moving forces of human life, but money is, in many cases, desired in and of itself. The desire to possess it, often stronger than the desire to use it, and goes on increasing when all the desires which point to ends beyond it, to be compassed by it, are falling it off. It may then be said truly that money is desired not for the sake of an end, but as part of the end. From being a means to happiness, it has come to be itself a principal ingredient, and of the individual's conception of happiness. So what Mill's saying here is, yes, originally money is desired as something for itself. But when you think of it on its own, just having it, you know, it's not really worth anything. It's only worth something insofar as it can get you things. And so, but it is a constitutive part of getting you the things. It's not just a means to the end, it is a constitutive part of the end. And so this is why I want to talk about the relationship between means and ends, and how that example of money is supposed to demonstrate the example between virtue and happiness is the same as the relationship between money and the things it can get you. So we have these two basic categories of human desiring and human action. We have the end, the thing we want, and the means, the way that we achieve the end. So we've got the means, the way that we achieve the thing that we want, the end. And the question is, what is the relationship between the means and the end? Is it that the means are simply external to the end, and that the means are not contained in the end? Or are the means contained in the end? And that in fact, the means are itself a part of the end, and that there is no clear separation between them. And so this distinction that I'm about to make is really the kind of the linchpin for Mill's argument, is that we can talk about there being an external relation between the means and the end, what we might call an in order to relation. And I have this in the notes. If you take a look at the notes that I have uploaded on chapter 4, the in order to relation, that I do this in order to get that. And the in order to relation in language, when we say in order to, that suggests an external relation. But there's also a different relationship between means and ends, what we might call for the sake of, which is different in language than in order to. It implies a different relationship between means and end. In order to implies that the means are simply they are simply a means to an end. Whereas the constitutive suggests that the means are actually the end in progress. So the example I give in the notes is that imagining you're going on vacation, and you have to get up really early in the morning to catch a flight to go to the beach. Would you say that getting up early, getting on a plane, and flying to the beach is part of what it means to have a good vacation? Well, presumably not. You would say that you are doing that in order to have a good vacation. But when somebody asks you when you get back from the trip, well, how was your vacation? You're going to say, well, it was great. You know, it started when I had to get up at 4 in the morning and get on a plane and fly to the beach. Presumably that's not going to be the first thing you describe. Whereas, the other example is, well, laying on the beach and listening to music. Well, that is part of having a good time on your vacation. That is part, it's not the only thing you do on your vacation, but it is definitely part of the whole of having a good time on vacation. And so there you can see the difference. That in fact, laying on the beach and listening to music is constitutive of the end of having a good time on vacation. It constitutes the end. Whereas getting on a plane, getting up at 4 in the morning to catch an early flight is not that doesn't constitute the end. It's only it has an external relationship to it. Conceptually there is a gap between them, whereas the other one there is no conceptual gap between the two. So that distinction is what Mill is going to say is that in fact um, we desire to be virtuous because of the pleasure we associate with being virtuous. We don't so you can desire to be virtuous for its own sake, um, but that is, and initially you may think that it is for its own sake only, and that there is nothing more beyond it. But Mill is going to say ultimately it's the pleasure you associate with virtue, and by pleasure he means happiness. It's the pleasure you associate with acting virtuously, the consciousness of what it feels like to act virtuously. That pleasurous, that pleasurable state of consciousness of acting virtuously is actually part of happiness. And so initially you may think that acting virtuously is something you desire for its own sake, but um, you know, the repeated successful attempts at acting virtuously, you associate pleasure with that. You associate and that is ultimately what you desire. It's not that you can't desire to be virtuous, but Mill is saying uh, he is able to show that it is the consciousness of that you would not act virtuously if you didn't associate that pleasurable feeling with it. That there is a psychological association that you associate with that acting virtuously that you cannot deny, and that is ultimately what part of everything we desire. So on page, so just to on page 39, this is the sort of bigger picture for the chapter. Mill says, we have then an answer to the question of what sort of proof the principle of utility is susceptible. So that's the title of this chapter. If the opinion which I have now stated is psychologically true, if human nature is so constituted as to desire nothing which is not either a part of happiness or a means to happiness, we have no other proof, and require no other. If so, happiness is the sole end of human action, and the promotion of it the test by which to judge all human conduct, from whence it necessarily follows that it must be the criterion of morality, since a part of it is included in the whole. There you go. That is Mill's kind of conclusion, and it all follows from everything we just said leading to this. So that's all I have for today's lecture. It's a bit brief. Let me know if you have any questions. And also, if you have any questions about the final paper, it is a bit you don't have a lot of time to do it. I hope that you've got secured access to the film and that you've begun watching it. It is due by Monday at noon. I have to submit your grades by Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. So that noon deadline for your final paper is a hard and fast deadline. So please be sure, because I have to have time to grade them Monday night and Monday afternoon. So please have that in by noon on Monday. And I will let me know if you have any questions.